Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Join the Patreon to get early access to videos and check out the website.
Go ahead, get the book. Come on, subscribe to his podcast.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Early Mormon history. Joseph Smith, the craziest story I've ever heard. And man, I've been hearing Scientology stuff with Leah Remini, the Aftermath on the A&E show that's on Netflix. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But if they only knew what this guy did. I mean, this makes L. Ron Hubbard look like a saint. So this is a very, very interesting podcast because of you two gentlemen. All thanks to you two gentlemen for the insight, for the charismatic, enthusiasm that you guys are bringing and the depth that we're willing to go into the story. And man, we're just scratching the surface. Well, I can't imagine going to Bryce Blankenagle's Naked Mormonism podcast, which you guys are told and commanded by one of the 10 commandments on MythVision that I have. Thou shalt subscribe to anyone who's on my show, or thou get condemneth forever, cooked in the broiling of God's wrath, or something like that. It's something like that. So go down in the description, join his Patreon right now. It's free. And yes, you might get a cup of coffee extracted from your bank account every once in a while to hear an amazing podcast in depth on the history of Mormonism. And that's Bryce Blankenagle, the host of Naked Mormonism podcast. And then we have David Fitzgerald. David Fitzgerald loves to talk about all sorts of heretical stuff. A lot of times sexual things, just being honest, because you talk about that. I mean, that's a very hot topic. But he has written the book, The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons, and it's book 1. The Mormons, guys, you have to get this book. This is a must get. You can get it ebook. You can get it paperback if you're like me and you like to touch the book that you're reading. And he has a Patreon as well. You guys, it's brand new. Go support him, or I will invoke the commandment and the wrath. And there's like plagues that come with it too, something like that. Anyway, guys, I can't believe we just went through the theology, the polygamy. Oh my gosh. And there's so much more that we just don't have the time to get into. Bryce, where do we go? Since you gave us some snippets of Bennett, and I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? Something happened. Take over, guys. I'm so excited to see where we go.
Right. This is some of the funnest period of Mormonism right here. We're in the late Nauvoo era, right? So Joseph Smith always had some really revolutionary and theocratic aspirations throughout his entire career, throughout his entire life. And when the church started in New York, it was campy. It was 60 people. It was the birth of something great, and people could sense it. When he gets to Kirtland, he gets to try out sorts of things, and he gets to grow and expand his church, and he begins getting all of these revelations, and the church expands wildly. And it incorporates communalism and the consecration of property and all of these dictatorial fiats that are given by the mouthpiece of God. And it really selects a group of followers who are very loyal to the one true prophet, the messenger of God, the mouthpiece. Missouri is when Joseph Smith really gets to test out his militant aspirations. And he had tried that with Zion's Camp back in Kirtland, but it wasn't until he was in all-out war with the state of Missouri that he becomes a military religious leader. It becomes very dangerous, but once Nauvoo comes along, the Nauvoo era of the church is truly the most fascinating because Joseph Smith was given the most power he ever had. And he became so much more dangerous in Nauvoo because the city was his city and he was in control of everything. And everything that happened in Nauvoo happened with Joseph Smith's knowledge. He becomes the criminal kingpin that he aspired to become back in Kirtland and New York and Missouri. But in Nauvoo, he actually does it. He actually becomes a criminal kingpin. And he is able to do this because of the Nauvoo Charter. And we discussed that a few weeks ago, right before we took our break to talk about theology and polygamy. But the Nauvoo Charter, when I talked about it on my show, I called it God Mode Joe, because it's like he put in the cheat codes to have, infinite stats and infinite health and, infinite defenses. And the thing is the Nauvoo Charter created his municipal court that ran under his direction. It was staffed with all of his cronies, and it allowed the city to pass bills and to collect taxes and to do everything necessary to run as a city. But the thing is, the whole thing was his machination. It was all his, and he ran everything. And that Nauvoo Municipal Court came to be a sticking point that eventually led to his death, because it was a banana republic court, right? It was whatever he wanted, whatever outcome he wanted in any case, the court would reach that outcome. And witnesses could be produced for anything and everything that needed to be said in the court.
And even when you were dealing with outsiders outside his little pocket theocracy, he'd have habeas corpus writs written up by the government of Nauvoo that would keep him out of, from bounty hunters and, marshals, federal marshals to come get him. Very handy stuff.
Yeah. And this really came to a fore in middle of 1842, where we kind of left off the timeline, right? So the last things that we were discussing in the history timeline was the endowment ceremony being introduced, the spread of polygamy, and we talked a bit about John C. Bennett, right? And John Bennett was this guy who was, living with the Smith family for 18 months. He was a very close friend of Joseph Smith. The guy was the mayor of Nauvoo. He was incredibly well connected. He was also the quartermaster general of the Illinois State Militia, so he was able to supply the Nauvoo Legion, the city's mandatory service militia, with state armaments, lots of guns. So he was an incredibly powerful person to have as a right-hand man to Joseph Smith, but he was also he was a kindred scoundrel. He was kind of a dick.
You did mention that they had a celebration, and during the celebration, they kind of showed the person who visited that was not a Mormon, who was like, "There's a real problem." Who was that person's name again? That you said there's a serious problem here.
Right, that's Thomas Sharp, and Thomas Sharp is the editor of a paper called the Warsaw Signal. Right. And the Warsaw Signal is a testament to how important local reporting is and local newspapers. Right. Because we get the AP news services, and we have all of the national syndicates of news coverage. Most of their reporting comes from local reporters. Right. Most of the stuff that we see in headlines and CNN, all that stuff is collected by a small local town's news agency. And then those bigger syndicates just pick up the stories and reprint them, right? And very much so that was the same case with the 19th century as well, but very much more so because it took the actual printing. There wasn't the advent of online press where all of the news agencies look like they have equal credibility, right? When it came to local newspapers, it required the New York Tribune and the Chicago Times, and it took these large newspapers picking up local newspapers and reprinting them for the nation to get the rest of the story. And then once one of the big syndicates picked it up, then all of the other nationwide syndicates would pick up the stories as well. So the Warsaw Signal and Thomas Sharp's paper, it was absolutely crucial to inform the rest of the nation on what was going on with the Mormons, right?
And I got to make a comment on this because we never touched on this that I think is important. Is Bennett still in the picture when Sharp's in the city?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So very quickly, when it comes to the localities, we have Nauvoo that's on the peninsula, on the river. About 25 miles south down the river is the town of Warsaw. And then directly east from Warsaw by another 10 miles or 15 miles, I think, is the town of Carthage. Now, Warsaw and Carthage are the hotbeds of anti-Mormonism. And when I say anti-Mormonism, I mean Thomas Sharp founded the anti-Mormon political party. Wow. Literally called it the anti-Mormon political party because he recognized how powerful Joseph Smith was becoming. And the only way to combat the Mormon political party was with the anti-Mormon political party.
So this guy, Thomas Sharp, witnessed a ton of seeming soldiers.
Yes.
He knew that this is a
And
military.
Yes.
And that's what I was going to ask is they buried this cannon a long time ago, ladies and gentlemen. Do you remember when they buried this thing? What happened to that cannon, Bryce? Tell us about this. So,
Right. So I read a paper, God, this must have been 4 years ago. So I'm struggling to remember the details of it, but this cannon actually had a name. It was like Old Betsy or something like that. And I want to say that the article is written by Cheryl Bruno, but she tracked down the location of the author of the article was able to track down the location of this cannon, and they buried it in 1838 when they suspected that a surrender was going to happen and that the Mormons would have to give up all their guns, and only the Mormons knew where that cannon was buried. I believe it was 2 years later they went and discovered the cannon, and I believe they brought it back to Nauvoo with them. This is a small cannon though, right? It is a cannon, but it's a little like 6-pounder or whatever. It's just a little cannon. And it was used for celebratory purposes on their July 4th celebrations, as well as during this military parade that Thomas Sharp went and observed and was like, oh, holy crap, what's going on here? They shot a cannon at that parade as well, which may or may not have been that cannon. So they did recover that cannon.
interesting. I'm sorry. All right, back on track.
But it's also terrifying, right? Because that was stolen from the Missouri militia. That's dangerous. You transported stolen armaments from the government across state lines, like.
And when you think about as you started the anti-Mormon party, it's like they'd already seen a year before what happened in Missouri when this little theocracy is actively at war with its neighbors and people are getting killed over it. I would think they'd be peeing their pants at the thought of these guys' militia getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more equipped and connected to the reins of power. Just seeing growing political influence and military influence in numbers. Yeah.
So let me steer us on track, because I know me and I love the details, but we got to figure a way back onto the train tracks. And so this guy Bennett, you said he defects, but he doesn't just defect. There's a propaganda that develops against this guy, and this guy is helping make this possible. If it weren't for this guy, Joe Smith cannot get his crap in order. He's sending like his top dogs to go to Europe to help find people to recruit. And now they're coming back, and there's this thing growing, this city, he's the vice mayor and all this stuff. And Bennett is a big guy in the picture. What happens to this guy? What is going on here?
So it's kind of tough to tell exactly how this played out. And what we do know is that, it probably centered around the assassination attempt of Governor Lilburn Boggs.
And I would argue it even happened earlier than that with the polygamist attemptings of the failed seduction of Sidney Rigdon's daughter from Joseph, which he blamed on Bennett, because Bennett had told the girl ahead of time that what Joseph was up to, and their relationship was never the same after that.
Yeah, so there are a couple of components that caused the relationship between Joe and Bennett to sour, right? And that Nancy Rigdon was one of the issues with Martha Brotherton locking her up in the room and forcibly pushing her to marry Brigham Young. That was another problem. Sarah Pratt and John Bennett were good friends. Maybe they were more than friends, maybe not. It doesn't matter. But Sarah Pratt refused Joseph's advances, and he began attacking Sarah Pratt. And then the assassination attempt of Governor Boggs, right? So all of these factors played into Joseph and Bennett. Their relationship was groaning by April of 1842.
When was it that Joseph denounced Bennett publicly for the first time?
Joe suspected that Bennett was had plans for Joe, or that Bennett was a danger in April,
including planning to kill him in an accident.
So there was another military parade that was scheduled for April 6th, because that's the anniversary of the church. It was the 12th anniversary of the church. It was scheduled for the April 6th, and Bennett was very particular about Joseph Smith standing in a very particular place during the drills, and Joe was like, "No, I'm not into it. No thanks, bro." But yeah, Joe thought that Bennett was trying to get him killed by a military drill accident, accidental discharge of a gun or something,
which is totally plausible.
Absolutely. But yeah, by early 1842, absolutely plausible. And also, I think that Bennett was scared of Joseph Smith's power when it came to Governor Lilburn Boggs, right? So Boggs was the governor that had signed the Mormon extermination order. It was because Boggs refused to take a hands-on approach in the Missouri Mormon War that things spiraled out of control so quickly, right? And in 1842, the state of Missouri published all of the documents relating to the Mormon War that they had collected, that they were trying to prosecute Joseph Smith for. But because he wouldn't step foot back in the state of Missouri, they couldn't actually get him, right? They needed an extradition warrant from the governor of Illinois that was signed by both governors of Missouri and Illinois in order to extradite Joseph Smith across the border to face prosecution in Missouri. So they released all that treasure trove of documents and data that they had collected during the prosecution. And Bennett saw all of this, and he knew that Porter Rockwell had been sent to fulfill prophecy. And 2 days after Porter Rockwell gets back into Nauvoo, word arrives that Governor Lilburn Boggs has tragically been shot, and he's not going to make it. He did end up making it, but the assassin fired buckshot through a window into the guy's study at night, and he caught 2 balls to the neck, one of which he immediately swallowed, and another ball to the head. And he was suspected to be dead within a few days, but he ended up surviving it.
Right, tough bastard. Yeah, I heard it was even more. I heard the shots were arranged differently, and most of them hit the skull. But yeah, the business about swallowing the ball is like blah. But yes,
yeah, he caught one in the neck and swallowed it.
What do you think? This was a Mormon assassin?
We know with extreme confidence it was Porter Rockwell. Because the police investigation showed, the gun, they traced the gun to this local business, and this guy who had come up from the north, who was Porter Rockwell. There's very strong lines of evidence tying him to the place, tying him to the gun, tying him to the weapon.
And Porter Rockwell's the crazy looking guy, right? That was prophesied to never die.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that didn't happen yet. Now,
that's true. That's when he came back from all this.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Okay. So let's get a view of Porter Rockwell, just because he truly is something special. Right? look at this guy, right? And his book, this is his biography by Hal Schindler. It's from the 1960s, but it is it's a remarkable book. But yeah, this guy is just intense, right?
Yeah. Those pit bull eyes of his just kill me. He looks like Chewbacca with rabies.
Right. And I will show everyone, this is actually my favorite whiskey. It's out of a distillery in Ogden, Utah, and it's basically Fireball, but with honey infused in it, and it's just so good. But yeah, it's Porter's Fire, and it has the prophecy on the back of it. It's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we think it's Porter Rockwell. He is at the time. He had the motive. He had a weapon. The weapon that was used after he fired it, he loaded the gun too hot. He fired it, and it fell beneath. It landed on the ground in the mud. It was raining when he fired, and he wasn't able to recover the gun. He ran away too quickly. So the constable investigating the assassination attempt was able to recover that gun and trace it back to the shop owner who said that the gun had been stolen just a few days before. That's when Porter Rockwell got into town.
Yeah. Oh, and he was also working at that very place. It wasn't just
he was working nearby at a stable.
Okay.
Working for a guy taking care of his horse. And Porter loved his horses. He loved his race horses. So and carriages too. So when Porter gets back, Joseph Smith gifts him a brand new carriage, and Porter Rockwell at this point becomes the taxi service of Nauvoo. So anybody comes into town off of a steamer up the Mississippi or down the Mississippi or whatever, they need to go somewhere in town. Porter Rockwell shows up with his fancy new carriage, and takes him, and maybe he hears what they're conversating about while he's on this trip. He was typically a very quiet individual. He didn't speak up very much. He was illiterate, and maybe he heard stuff. Maybe he transferred that back to his old childhood friend Joseph Smith. Right? These guys have known each other since Porter was 4 years old, and Joe was 9 or 10 years old. Yeah. Right? So they have been best friends since childhood. And he was a scoundrel. He was one of these rats. So Porter Rockwell probably pulls this trigger, and it divides historians. There's people say that it was a political opponent because that was a propaganda that Joe used at the time, right? Because Boggs was running for state senate at that time. I don't find that likely. I simply don't. Nobody else hated Governor Boggs more than the Mormons. And Porter Rockwell was there when it happened, and he got back in Nauvoo just 2 days before news arrived that Boggs had been shot. Right. Right. Anyway, yeah.
So then what happens to Bennett and Joe? I mean, there's some crap going on. What leads to Bennett's defecting, and what happens to Joe?
So Joe holds a high council meeting and it excommunicates John C. Bennett.
For what?
Who is, I think the charges were unchristian-like conduct and speaking ill of the Lord's prophet or something. It was,
but yeah, both those things. But also under the surface, abortions, adultery, making fun of spiritual wifery, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of tough to tell the differences between what Bennett was doing and what Joe was doing here, because they were doing the same thing. Joe was just the guy who said that I speak for God while he's doing it, right? They both. I mean, Bennett owned a brothel, right?
If things had gone slightly different, we're talking about John Bennett through this whole thing, and not Joseph Smith.
Very much so.
He's in a pod.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was he practicing polygamy too, Bennett?
Yeah. So he was also, he was helping the people who were caught up in it to conceal the evidence of it. Right. He was one of the few people who was in high church leadership ranks who I think the women who were caught up in this actually ended up trusting. And I use for evidence for that is how many women gave him information to be printed publicly with their names attached to it.
Dang.
Yeah, right. So they must have trusted him to some degree, or he must have been the lesser of two evils to some degree for them to go against the will of the prophet and to send their letters and data to him for his expose.
I hadn't thought about that aspect, but that makes a lot of sense too, because neither of them is really above the other morally or ethically. They are basically clones of each other.
So
Joseph and Joseph, boom,
They kick him out, David, and excommunicate him. What happens in that? Is that like a pinnacle moment in this situation where?
Yes.
Does he go out kicking and screaming, saying no, or?
He flees. He gets the hell out of Nauvoo.
He knows what's up.
Yeah, he goes to Carthage, actually, and Carthage ends up becoming his home for a few months while he's collecting all of the data. So immediately he begins writing letters to the Sangamo Journal, letters to the editor of the Sangamo Journal, which was a fairly large newspaper in Illinois. And they published all of his letters in total with the extra documents that he had collected. And they were basically just general exposés of Mormonism and of polygamy and of the political machinations of the Mormons and of so much that's going on. But also, Bennett openly says that Joe told Porter Rockwell to go kill Lilburn Boggs. Yeah. Lilburn Boggs also wakes up and files an affidavit on July, I think it's like July 2nd or something, 1842, where he says that Porter Rockwell and Joseph Smith tried to murder him. So he survives, and not only survives, but he makes an affidavit claiming that it was the Mormons, it was Porter Rockwell who tried to kill him. So with the weight of Governor Boggs having woken up and filing that affidavit, and Porter Rockwell, being at the focus of all of this, and now Bennett defecting and publishing in his letters in the Sangamo Journal,
oh my god,
that Joe told Porter Rockwell to go kill Lilburn Boggs. Immediately, the Danites are out hunting John C. Bennett. Right. And
I just want to point out that there's even more of the story that we're zipping over right now. It's like there's so much more that's been happening behind the scenes of this. But anyway, let's continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So Porter Rockwell confronts John C. Bennett in Carthage. And Carthage is one of the two cities of anti-Mormonism, right? Warsaw and Carthage are these two cities that are, directly south of Nauvoo that are the hotbeds of anti-Mormonism. So Carthage and Warsaw are the only places that John C. Bennett would be safe. So Porter Rockwell comes and confronts John C. Bennett while in Carthage and says, stop printing those lies about me, attacks him. They get into a scuff, and the citizens in the tavern kick Porter Rockwell out of the tavern and say he's not welcome here anymore. Because the people know who Porter Rockwell is. They know that he's one of Joe's hitmen. They know he's a Danite, right?
Yeah. And I mean, just as a gunslinger alone, he's estimated to have killed 38, 40 people that they know about. I mean, just you
just
let
spoke in
alone all
tongues.
The skullduggery that he was responsible for.
David, you just spoke in tongues, bro.
Sorry.
Start over.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, and Porter Rockwell at this time, he was growing this reputation as a gunslinger. By the time he was done, there were at least 38 or 40 open outright shootings that they knew that he'd just come up to a dude and shot, aside from all the skullduggery that we don't know about or don't have records of or have secret records of.
And one thing that plays into one reason why Warsaw and Carthage hated the Mormons so much was the Mormons were also really bad neighbors. There was what was known as the river rat problem. And I don't think there's evidence that Porter Rockwell himself was a river rat, but what the river rats or who they were people who would go out on nights on a little skiff up and down the Mississippi, and they go to nearby settlements, non-Mormon settlements, and steal a bunch of property. And then it would be distributed among the citizens of Nauvoo. Some of it would find itself wound up in the inventory of Joseph Smith's red brick store and would be sold to the Mormons. So the river rat problem was a huge issue. And whenever somebody would come into Nauvoo and say, hey, that man showed up at my farm and stole my tools or stole my horse or stole whatever, the person would be brought into the Nauvoo Municipal Court. No evidence could be found that they ever did such a thing, and they would be immediately released and never prosecuted for any of this, right? So this municipal court, once again, is causing a rift with the rest of the cities that are non-Mormons, because the Mormons are exercising so much power, and they're not beholden to any laws. Joe is the lawgiver. Whatever he says goes, and that's not how we do America. that's not that's not. It was still so early in the American experiment. This is terrifying.
Picture if Illinois had turned into Utah, what the world would look like, or America would look like. Yeah.
Briefly, it was, right? Nauvoo was the largest city in Illinois, right? I mean, at its height in 1844, it was something like 2 to 3 times the size of Chicago. It was a massive city. And
I was trying to remember what the military strength of the Nauvoo Legion at this time was compared to the state and the federal government at the time. And it was dangerous. It was a major threat.
Yeah. So by 1844, so because service in the Nauvoo Legion was compulsory, they had about 3,500 armed fighting men in the Nauvoo Legion, which is that rivals the size of basically any state militia. That rivals the size of a militia that the federal government could bring together at the time. That's a huge militia, and it's for a city. It's not for a county. It's not for a state. It's for a single city.
Do we have number estimations? Like, do you have an idea how many men there were in this militia? An idea?
3,500. Yeah.
This beats his little 200 min excursion back in the day when they, God told me we need to go back home. Actually, you guys should have been listening.
Now they've got like Napoleonic uniforms, and
now
field cannons, and
he's talking crap about the president, like almost like, man, this guy is, ooh.
Right. So because all of these, this is a cascading effect, right? And in my podcast series, I called this the Bennett meltdown because so many huge scandals broke all at the same time. And this guy, Bennett, who was a very, very trusted military leader, right? He was a brigadier, lieutenant general of the Nauvoo Legion. He was one of the highest ranking officers. He was the mayor of the city. He was chairman of the University of Nauvoo. He was, he was the most powerful guy in Nauvoo. And he and Joe get in a fight and they break up. And people are wondering what the hell is going on because now Bennett's nowhere to be found in the city. Suddenly people are whispering about letters in the Sangamo Journal that brother Bennett has been writing. And a bunch of these scandals are all catalyzing all at the same time. And then, of course, Lilburn Boggs is a huge issue, right? So Lilburn Boggs files that affidavit. And the governor of Missouri recognizes he needs to get the governor of Illinois' help to extradite Joseph Smith, to not only answer for the charges of attempting to murder Lilburn Boggs, but also to charge him on everything that happened during the 1838 Mormon War in Missouri, because the dude had escaped prison, right? He was still a fugitive running his own city.
Right.
So,
wow, I bet they saw all those papers that they signed saying, sure, we'll sign off on this. And now they're going, oh my gosh, why did we allow this to happen? And they didn't even know what they were getting themselves into. They didn't even know.
Right. And that's a salient point that we need to make here because there's a lot of vested interests in all of this, right? Politicians in Illinois wanted the Mormons there because if they could show enough favor to the Mormons, they get the Mormon voting bloc. Suddenly the biggest city of Illinois, you get all of their votes, right? That's huge. That would be one person, randomly showing up in Seattle or in the state of Washington and getting all of Seattle's votes, right? Like that is huge to get the Mormon voting bloc on your side. So each of the politicians were caught up in this game, and Stephen Douglas is one of the primary figures in all this. Each of these politicians and court justices and justices of peace and all of these politicians and powerful and wealthy people, they're basically in this game of one-upsmanship, trying to show more favor to the Mormons so that they can get the Mormon voting bloc, and everybody wants it. It's really dangerous because now the Mormons are controlling not just county or city politics, but national politics.
Bingo. Yeah, they've created a monster just like Joseph did in John Bennett.
Exactly. Gave them enough rope to hang you with. That's what happened. Yeah. Right.
I want to pause just ever so briefly. This also reminds me of what was happening in the 3rd and 4th century with early Christianity under Constantine. We talk about, Constantine was the first Christian emperor. He really wasn't. But he was the first one to recognize it. Oh, look at all these guys. They're so obedient to their bishops, Come on, let's pay attention to this up and coming religious movement.
I'm sorry, guys. I literally, my sister-in-law just brought a sandwich in, and I'm like, Bennett or sandwich? And I was like, but okay, can you recap just a second? And I hate that I'm saying this because I'm not even going to cut this. I really want this. Recap what you said in the last 45 seconds for me, if you would. I'm sorry.
Bennett got super strong and a big threat to everything. Oh no, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And all this simultaneously going on, and Joseph Smith's potentially going to pay for all the crimes he's ever done.
We'll see.
And they're working on it for real. This isn't just like they're really like trying to legally get this guy. Right. What happens?
But what they need is some evidence, some written evidence, perhaps some testimonies from people. So where are they going to get it?
And Bennett provided that, right? Bennett started working with the okay, so rewind a little. Governor Reynolds of Missouri signed a warrant requesting extradition from the governor of Illinois, who was Governor Carlin. And Governor Carlin signed a warrant of arrest for Joseph Smith, as well as an extradition warrant. So Bennett begins working with the constables, the sheriffs who come in from the state of Missouri, cross state lines, which there isn't an interstate police force at this time, right? This is an extremely rare case where somebody would cross state lines, and then they would have to get the governors of those states to agree to extradite somebody, because states are basically their own little pocket governments, right? It's much more open now than it was back then, but this is the early 19th century, right? They were still experimenting with the division of powers, the differences in governments of states, and so on and so forth. So Governor Reynolds gets Governor Carlin's help, and both of them sign all the documentation necessary to arrest Joseph Smith in the state of Illinois, bring him across the state line into Missouri, and to face charges for the assassination of Governor Lilburn Boggs. Assassination attempt. I need to say that because the guy survived, which was really, really bad for Joe.
Against all odds, yeah, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do they actually extradite him? Do they actually get him out of state?
So the arrest warrant was for Joseph Smith and for Porter Rockwell, right? Because the affidavit claimed that Porter Rockwell was the person who had pulled the trigger, and that Joseph Smith was accessory before the fact, right? It was conspiracy charge, basically. So the constables come into Nauvoo and they arrest Joseph Smith and Porter Rockwell. And Joseph says, "Here is my writ of habeas corpus." We will have this hearing in the Nauvoo Municipal Court, and you will release me on this writ of habeas corpus. The constables don't know what to do, because they were there on a special order from governors of 2 states. Yeah. Right? They have special permissions to cross state lines to get a fugitive and to bring him back across state lines. They are exercising some rare provisions in various state governments and constitutions to get a hold of this criminal kingpin. And now he's telling them that, no, I'm going to hold this hearing in my own city court. And we're going to see if your accusations have any merit. And they said, well, okay, that's unfortunate, but what we can do right now is put you into the custody of the Nauvoo City Constable, who was, I think, John P. Green at this time. And we will go and get proper documentation, an updated version, more bulletproof extradition warrant from the governor, Governor Carlin in Springfield. And we'll be back in a couple of days with that document. Now, don't you go nowhere. Don't you go anywhere.
Just the fact that these guys rode into town to arrest him in the middle of his own town, that takes some guts right there.
Well, that's the thing, too, because what was their other option?
Yeah.
They didn't have another option. They would not leave the city alive.
Yeah.
So these are the guys at the beginning of the show. When you showed him standing up there with his sword and the two guys that are in the midst of this huge legion, you've got the picture.
I'll pull it up right now.
The picture.
Keep describing them.
You should. Yeah. And so you got to imagine this guy is like a tyrannical, everybody listening to him, Napoleon figure. I mean, he's the voice of God. And here these 2-3 guys have the balls to sit in the middle of this crowd and go, "Hey, when you're done talking, I need to talk to you because I'm going to arrest you," with all these men around who are thinking, "We will cut your head off. Like, try and take my profit, and we're willing to do whatever it takes."
The balls on these guys just blows my mind that they rode into town with just a handful.
Either they had balls or they just
that was gonna.
They either had balls or they were oblivious, David, because they may not have realized the danger that they were involved in.
No,
at that
they
level.
were not oblivious, right? So this is only like 3 years after the Missouri Mormon War. These guys were people who were caught up in the Missouri Mormon War, right? Like these are people who were involved in the fight,
right?
Ooh,
they're very aware of who they're dealing with.
So before you tell us what happens to Joe, because he always does some crazy shit, okay? Porter Rockwell, man, what are they doing with him? I mean, they're looking for this guy too, right?
Right. So
did they find him?
So they're both arrested, and they are transferred to the custody of the Nauvoo constable, and they hold their sham municipal court trial and grant Joe's writ of habeas corpus. And Joe then decides there's a couple points of order that he needs to take care of. One of which is immediately go into hiding, and he does. He goes into hiding. Right. Smart. Good
I'll be
call.
right back. I just need to get a few things.
Yeah. And there's this hilarious scene too when those sheriffs constables come back into Nauvoo looking for Joe and Porter Rockwell. They're like, where is he? They approach the constable and he's like, well, he was released on a writ of habeas corpus. And the guys are like, we got the docs right here. No, he's coming with us. And they show up at the Nauvoo at the Nauvoo homestead, trying to find Joe, and Emma basically stalled them at the door long enough for Joe to slip out the back window and slide through a cornfield and go hide in a shack. So Emma really in many ways is a perfect mafia wife too, because she's able to help him when, fulfill the role that she needs to keep her husband out of handcuffs. And she did.
And this goes right into your theory, Bryce, that she's in on it. She's getting something out of all of this. So whatever that is, I mean, either that or she's that abused as a wife. And I doubt that's the case.
Well,
I mean, you know what I mean?
It's a little column A and B, right? This is something that she never would have done of her own volition, but she found herself in a circumstance that Joseph Smith had crafted over years, that she really didn't have any other options than to help him.
Yeah.
And like you wonder, where does that mentality end? What is the cutoff point? What step is too far for a mafia wife to continue to look the other way or to continue to help their husband? And those are much bigger questions, I think.
Okay, so he escapes. These guys go back home and they say, you know what? He's hiding. They know this dude he's on the run.
Yeah.
And he spends basically the last 6 months of 1842 in hiding. He's bouncing around various farms and homes of other people and of members.
Picking up a couple new wives on the way too.
A lot, actually. 1842 was his most active year picking up wives, picking up a whole lot of wives. There's a lot going on with Joe in hiding because he's still trying to run his government, but he also prioritizes passing a new law. And this new law, I'm trying to paraphrase, trying to remember it word for word, but I can't remember the exact title of it. But it was like an extra special case on behalf of President Joseph Smith, which expanded the powers of writs of habeas corpus in the city of Nauvoo, which basically said that if anybody from anywhere comes into Nauvoo with an attempt to arrest Joseph Smith or anybody in the city of Nauvoo, then a hearing of habeas corpus will be held in the city of Nauvoo that will take precedent over any court hearing that they are trying to bring or extradite that person to. Further, if the person is found to have arrested that Nauvoo citizen under false pretenses or not without the proper documentation, and remember, this is Joe's court, he determines what's proper documentation, then they will be arrested. So it granted the Nauvoo City Constable power to arrest anybody who was trying to arrest Joseph Smith.
It's fun to make your own country. Yeah.
Wow.
These are component pieces. All of these are ingredients you need to make your own sovereign government, your own sovereign theocracy. And Joe, that's what Joe was doing, right?
Let me ask you this. This is important. This takes us back to the very first episode. And this is why I love what you're doing. He has, at this time, he has treasonous papers that are documented. There's stuff that he has written right now that if the government found, it's over. Their war's happening. They're coming in and they don't care what you say. It's going to stop him from doing what he's doing. If I'm not mistaken.
Not quite yet.
Okay.
Because the scene that... Yeah, the scene from that portrait is still 2 years in the future.
Oh, same
That's-
guys?
That's still 2 years in the future. Different guys. That's
Okay.
different guys.
And remember,
That scene is iconic.
Yeah, it's a
but that's
propaganda
not.
picture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what's going on right now.
Okay,
This is
okay.
this is a precursor to that. But what is captured there with those constables on the horses trying to like, hey, you know, there's a crowd seeing Joseph Smith speaking, and the constables are like, hey, we got to talk to you. That was still very much what happened with these constables arresting Joe in 1842. Joe felt like he could retain control of his city, but he had to remain in the city while he was in hiding. And he was fairly confident that the Nauvoo Legion could protect him, but Porter Rockwell didn't have the same confidence, or Joseph Smith thought that it'd be better if Porter Rockwell GTFO'd. And Rockwell fled to Indiana. He fled across another state line to get even further away from Missouri. And he remained there until, I want to say, was that?
Until time for the migration to Utah, I thought.
No. I believe he was there until, I believe it's October of 1842, October or November of 1842.
Well, he's certainly out of the picture at this juncture.
He's out for the most of the remainder of 1842.
Right. Oh, of course,
yeah.
actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because I just realized, oh, wait, no, he does come up.
He does. Yeah. No, he comes back. He comes
back. I just realized, oh, yeah, he does come back. Yeah.
He comes back. So, so Porter Rockwell flees Illinois altogether. And he is nowhere to be found. No, not known, nothing. Nobody knows where he is. He ends up dictating a letter that is sent to Joseph Smith, basically like, hey, what can you do for me? Help me out, brother. And I don't believe that there was ever a response to that letter, or if there was, it was never recorded. So Rockwell is all alone. And he is away from his people. He works, I believe, as a horse boarder or something to that effect, or maybe taking care of tack. I'm not sure. Something with horses, because that's what he was always doing. And he spends out the rest of 1842 in Indiana. And Joe continues to run his church. He continues to get more wives, all in hiding right now. He's not sure when he's, going to actually get popped for all of this. But some good news comes Joe's way, because it's an election year. And this election year means that Governor Carlin is no longer going to be governor of Illinois. Instead, we get Governor Thomas Ford. Now, in all of this, this is actually pretty interesting, because I'm not sure how to interpret these pieces of evidence, but I think it can be read a few ways. Governor Carlin begins sending letters back and forth to various people in Nauvoo, trying to get them to comply with his extradition warrant, so that he can get these fugitives out of his state and to Missouri, where they can face prosecution. Right. Well, Governor Carlin ends up sending and receiving and sharing a letter exchanges with Emma, Joe's wife, while Joe is in hiding. Right. Governor Carlin basically is telling the members, the Mormons, that your prophet is a fugitive, that we need to have him heard in the state of Missouri. And Emma sends a letter to him and basically makes a legal argument to the governor that this is infringing on his rights as an American citizen, that you can't do this. You can't extradite him, that this is not that we are not responsible for what happened in Missouri. We are not responsible for the assassination of Governor Boggs. At this time as well, Joe was able to collect like some 1,000 affidavits of people saying that he was nowhere near Missouri and he couldn't have possibly been responsible for assassinating Wilburn Boggs. So the propaganda machine is constantly churning while Joe is in hiding. Him and his boys are meeting in these secret places, and he's trying to, get as much control over his people while all these scandals are breaking, because this is all part of the Bennett meltdown, right? He's trying to retain control while being a silent partner in the church. He's not able to speak publicly, which, if Joe can't preach to his people, he's neutered. He's not making that personal connection to his charisma that he needs to retain for his people to see him as the one true prophet. He can feel a lot of things are slipping, right? There's also infighting going on, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly. This is another one of those junctures.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, this is one of those junctures where Mormonism could have just gone away in a poof, Yeah. Yet again.
So like one of these, for example, Orson Pratt comes back from his mission in Europe in like April of 1842, and he finds out that Sarah Pratt is caught up in all of this public controversy. His wife is caught up in the controversy with John Bennett and Joseph Smith, and finds out that Sarah Pratt has probably been like traded around with these guys, or like she was coerced or like forced or into these situations, and that now it's her name on everybody's lips, so it's whispered for evil in the city of Nauvoo. She's the subject of all the rumors, and Orson Pratt goes and tries to kill himself, right? Like there's dissent among the ranks of the leadership too, and who is allowed to know about polygamy, who is suffering the effects of polygamy while not knowing about it being a doctrine. There's a lot of controversy among the leadership as well.
Exactly. This huge secret civil war going on amongst the leadership. Behind the scenes, behind the curtains, it's ripping the leadership apart.
There's a civil war taking place within, even though it's a cold civil war. Secret civil war. And then there's some real stuff brewing that's about to happen. And I don't even know what to say. What's about to happen? I think we need to put a needle in it. We are wrapped up here in the hour. Give us a closing statement, maybe, and get us cliffhanged for the next episode, Bryce.
I want to touch on one more thing before our cliffhang, because at this time, right, Joe's also acquiring more wives, and we see a quintessential example of how these things played out. And one of these people that he wanted was a teenager named Sarah Ann Whitney, who he ended up marrying. And Sarah's parents were old friends of Joseph and Emma. In fact, the first people that Joe and Emma lived with when they arrived in Kirtland. You remember that rich guy, Newell K. Whitney, that Joseph walked up to and shook his hand and said, "You have prayed me here. Now, what do you want of me?" And the guy's like, "You have the advantage of me. Who are you?" And Joe says, "I'm the prophet of God." That wealthy guy, Newell K. Whitney, and his wife, Elizabeth Ann Whitney, had a teenage daughter named Sarah Ann Whitney. And Joe had targeted her at that time. She was, I want to say she was like 9 or 10 years old at that time. Now, 12 years later, I guess she's not much of a teenager anymore. He sends a letter to the Whitneys, and this is another one of Joe's infamous polygamy letters. "Dear and beloved brother Newell K. Whitney and sister Elizabeth Ann Whitney, and etc., Sarah Ann Whitney. I take this opportunity to communicate some of my feelings privately at this time, which I want you three eternally to keep in your own bosoms. For my feelings are so strong for you since that what has passed lately between us that the time of my absence from you seems so long and dreary." All right. He's in hiding writing this, right? So he goes on to very, very flowery and beautiful language. This is one of the very few letters that we have in actually Joseph's handwriting, not written by a scribe, which those letters are very few and far between. He says, okay. Come and see me. Come and see me in the forepart of the night. Let Brother Whitney come a little ahead and knock at the southeast corner of the house at the window. It is next to the cornfield. I have a room entirely by myself. The whole matter can be attended to with the most perfect safety. I know it is the will of God that you should comfort me now in this time of affliction, or not at all. Now is the time, or never. But I have no need of saying any such thing to you, for I know the goodness of your hearts, right? This is a letter that he's proposing to their daughter, right? In your hearts, and that you will do the will of the Lord when it is made known to you. The only thing to be careful of is to find out when Emma comes. Then you cannot be safe. But when she is not here, there is the most perfect safety. Only be careful to escape observation as much as possible. So Joe sends this letter to the Whitneys, one of which is, a soon-to-be wife of his, and says, "Come see me in my little shack. I have a place entirely to myself. I'm in hiding. I'm lonely. Come comfort me. It's the will of the Lord that you come and comfort me. We can do this all in perfect safety. And as long as Emma isn't here, everything's going to be fine.
Wow.
A bastard. What a magnificent bastard.
There are a couple ways to interpret that, right? It could be that he's like, hey, don't let my wife see you showing up. That's not going to be good for anybody. It could also be that Joe knew that Emma was being tailed by the sheriffs trying to find him. So wherever Emma was, those sheriffs would be, because they knew if they tailed Emma long enough, she would reveal where her husband's location is. So it could be that he's saying, as long as Emma isn't here, the constables won't show up behind you. They're not going to trail you to me. So there, once again, it's one of those documents that there are a few ways to interpret the evidence, and Emma's role in all of this is definitely up for question. So
and they could both be happening at the same time, and they don't exclude each other either. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So in all this,
to the point that he could say, "Oh no, I didn't mean that. I meant this." You know?
Yeah,
you got that from this. Oh no.
Yeah. There's always plausible deniability in all of it, right? Yeah.
Wow.
Paul does the same thing in his letter to Philemon, by the way. But anyway, that's a whole different story. Whole other story.
Wow.
So to cliffhang us, in all of this, the heat cooled down by September, October 1842. The sheriffs are no longer staying in town. Joe gives a couple of sermons, kind of trepidatiously, and they don't end up arresting him immediately after. Thomas Sharp in his Warsaw Signal is like, he's there, he's in Nauvoo, come arrest him, come get him. And the constables are like, well, it doesn't matter anymore because the new governor just got elected and he's not going to honor the extradition warrant from the old governor. There's nothing we can do. Emma is sharing letters back and forth with the governor. Emma and her two counselors in the Relief Society presidency, one of which is Joe's wife, one of which is the mother of Joe's, another of Joe's wife. They go and pay Governor Carlin a personal visit. And we don't know what happened, but they went and met personally with him. And that's Emma, Eliza Snow, and I think Elizabeth Ann Whitney, who make that visit.
I'd love to have been a fly on that wall.
Yeah, I would love to hear what was exchanged or see what sort of transaction transpired there. But in all of this, they feel like the heat has cooled down, and Joe makes a couple of statements, and he goes up and preaches a couple of times, and he's okay. So eventually Porter Rockwell says, all right, I'm coming back to Nauvoo. And I believe this happens in November. He hops on a ferry to cross a river, I believe, to get into the state of Illinois. And a couple of guys ask him, are you Porter Rockwell? And he stupidly answers yes. And they knock him down and tie him up. They're bounty hunters, and they just got their bounty.
Oh my gosh. Poking that one right there, dude. Holy moly. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready. Get ready. It's only going to get worse and better and worse and better and worse and better and worse. And stay tuned for the next episode. We love you. Thank you so much. Write down below what your comments are on this episode. Go check out their Patreon. You guys could check out ours as well. Like this, share this, get this out there. You might know an ex-Mormon or so. I don't know how many Mormons might pay attention, but it'd be pretty cool to get their attention as well. HBO, A&E, you name it, Netflix.
Come on. It's too good.
Yes.
Too good.
This is really, really good. And we don't have this. It's not documented like this. There's no, here's the real truth, nothing but the truth type of show. And man, this would take to the next level, this kind of material. So with that being said, if you've already forgotten, don't. We are MythVision.